your mind. It'll give you a new mindset, a millionaire mindset. Instead of thinking lack, you'll think of abundance after you finish reading this powerful book.
For decades, Peter Popoff stood behind a pulpit promising miracles to millions. His supporters saw a man of faith. His critics saw one of the most controversial figures in modern televangelism. Through scandals, investigations, and years of public scrutiny, he always seemed to find a way forward. But every long-running story reaches a point where there are no more places left to hide. And this time, the ending may be impossible to escape. The walls are finally closing in. For most of his life, Peter Popoff has been a man who walked away clean while everyone around him got burned. He survived exposure that would have buried anyone else. He survived bankruptcy. He survived investigation after investigation. But something has shifted in the last couple of years, and for the first time in a very long time, the man who always escaped looks like a man running out of road. Start with the broadcasting regulators in the United Kingdom, an agency known as Ofcom. Across last year alone, 2025, they came down on the network carrying his program not once, but twice. In March, they handed out a penalty of £150,000, ruling that his episodes carried harmful claims that his miracle spring water could improve serious health conditions and even repair people's broken finances. Then in December, they came back swinging again, this time with a fine totaling £375,000, and the regulator openly described the breaches as reckless. That is more than £500,000 in official penalties in a single year, all tied to putting this man and his promises on the air. For a man who built his entire career on the idea that he is a humble servant of God, having regulators brand his work as reckless and harmful is the kind of label that does not wash off. And the pressure is not only landing on Popoff himself, it is landing on the people closest to him, the family members who helped build and protect this empire for years. One of them is sitting in the middle of a legal nightmare right now, and his fate may end up dragging the whole operation into the light. To understand how serious things have become, you have to meet the man in Dublin. The son-in-law who ran out of places to run. Most people imagine a televangelist as one lone figure with a microphone and a Bible. Popoff was never that simple. He built a family machine, and the people who never appeared on camera were often the ones moving the money. His wife Elizabeth stood beside him for the entire ride. His daughter Amy rose to become the chief administrative officer of the ministry. His son Nicholas, who goes by Nick, became the executive vice president. This was not a one-man show. It was a household enterprise. Amy married a man named Jason Cardiff, and Cardiff handled the advertising and mailing side of the business. His own world has now collapsed in spectacular fashion. Back in 2018, the Federal Trade Commission went after Cardiff over a separate company he ran, one selling dissolvable strips, marketed with claims so outrageous that one product was advertised as clinically proven to help more than 97% of men with a deeply personal struggle. A judge later held him in contempt for lavish spending while that case was still active. By 2023, he was criminally indicted on charges that included fraud, identity theft, and witness tampering, the kind of charges that can put a man behind bars for 20 years. This year, 2026, Irish authorities arrested Cardiff inside his €3 million home in Dublin. Ireland's Justice Minister approved a request to extradite him to the United States to face those charges, and his next court date sits waiting in July. He has already surrendered his American passport. In the plainest terms, he is a man who has finally run out of places to hide. For 40 years, the public waited and waited for the reckoning, the handcuffs, the courtroom, the final sentence. And here it is arriving at last, except it landed on the son-in-law before it reached the man at the top. The question that hangs over everything is simple and chilling. How long can Popoff keep watching the people around him fall while he stays standing? To answer that, we have to go back to the act that built the entire kingdom, and to the night it nearly destroyed him. The voice only he could hear. Travel back to the 1980s. Popoff's program was beaming across the country on dozens of television stations and dozens of radio stations. By his own business manager's admission, the operation was burning through roughly $550,000 every single month. The money poured in from people who had been handed something they had never felt before in their lives. The overwhelming sense that God Himself knew their name and had come looking for them. Popoff would stand before a crowd of thousands of strangers and suddenly point. He would call out a woman's full name. He would announce the exact street where she lived. He would name the precise illness destroying her body. The room would detonate with emotion. How on earth could he know these things? It had to be God speaking through him, because no other explanation made sense to a believer. People sobbed, people fainted, people reached for their wallets, because surely a man with a direct line to heaven had earned every dollar they could press into his hands. Before each service, Popoff's team would work the room like professionals. They handed out cards where attendees wrote their names, their addresses, and the ailments they wanted healed. They struck up friendly conversations in line and gathered private details with warm, disarming smiles. Every scrap of that information flowed to Elizabeth, who sat backstage with a transmitter hidden beneath her clothing and the power source tucked inside her handbag. She read those details into a microphone, and Popoff caught every word through a tiny receiver buried in his ear. He was not hearing the voice of God. He was hearing his wife read aloud from a stack of index cards. For a while it worked flawlessly. Believers had no reason to doubt a miracle, and Popoff had every reason in the world to keep collecting. But a perfect deception only stays perfect until the wrong person decides to start listening. And the wrong person for Peter Popoff turned out to be a professional magician who had spent his entire life mastering the precise mechanics of how human beings get fooled. The magician who refused to look away. His name was James Randi, though the world knew him as the amazing Randi. He was a magician and an escape artist, but more than anything, he had turned himself into a relentless hunter of frauds. Randi lived by a philosophy that cuts right to the heart of this story. He liked to say that magicians are the most honest people on earth, because they tell you straight to your face that they are about to fool you, and then they do exactly that. The people he could not stomach were the ones who fooled you and then swore on God that it was real. Randi watched Popoff perform, and something gnawed at him. He attended the services in person, sometimes alongside a younger magician named Banachek, and he caught a tiny detail that nearly everyone else overlooked. Popoff appeared to be wearing what looked like a hearing aid. A man supposedly receiving direct transmissions from the Almighty had a small device tucked in his ear. That was the loose thread, and Randi began to pull on it with everything he had. He brought in an electronics specialist named Alec Jason, a man who understood radio signals and surveillance equipment inside and out. Jason showed up at a service in San Francisco in February of 1986, carrying expensive scanning gear, and he started hunting through the airwaves for whatever frequency Popoff's earpiece was locked onto. After patient, careful searching, the team found it. The number was 39.17 megahertz. a slice of the radio spectrum normally set aside for police and fire departments. And then they heard her. They heard Elizabeth Popoff's voice, crystal clear, feeding her husband his miracles one by one. The very first words they intercepted have become legendary among the people who study this case. She said, "Hello, Petey, I love you. I am talking to you. Can you hear me? If you cannot, you are in trouble." Then, all business now, she added that she was looking up names right at that moment. The team had it cold. They had captured the voice of God on tape, and the voice of God was a woman backstage reading prayer cards into a microphone. But Randi was not content with audio alone, because he understood something important about ordinary people. They needed to see the illusion collapse with their own eyes. So he laid a trap that turned this entire investigation into something almost theatrical. And what he did next exposed a streak of cruelty in Popoff that even the skeptics had not braced themselves for. The trap that exposed the cruelty. Randi recruited a volunteer named Don Henvik, and what this man was willing to do took genuine nerve. He attended Popoff's services in disguise, over and over, practically daring the so-called prophet to heal him. In San Francisco, he arrived as one man and was triumphantly cured of a drinking problem. In Anaheim, he shaved his head completely and arrived as an entirely different man, and Popoff cured him of arthritis, then proudly broadcast that healing for 3 weeks straight. The same man, healed of different things, aired as undeniable proof of God's power flowing through Popoff. But the masterstroke came in Detroit. Henvik, dressed as a woman, settled into a wheelchair and presented himself as someone dying of cancer. Healed this dying woman in front of the entire crowd. On the intercepted recording, you can actually hear the exact moment the illusion shatters. Elizabeth realizes the truth and screams a warning to her husband that the woman is a man, that he is a plant, that he needs to get away immediately. That alone would have been enough to finish most men, but the tapes carried something far darker than the trick itself. When the microphones captured the backstage chatter, they captured the real Peter Popoff and the people surrounding him. They captured mockery. They captured laughter aimed directly at the sick and the dying who had come seeking help. Real human beings had walked into that auditorium clutching their final shred of hope, and behind the curtain, they were being joked about by the very people pocketing their money. What those tapes revealed was an operation that took your money while laughing at your suffering. And Randi understood that the only force powerful enough to make an entire nation feel the weight of that cruelty was television itself, on the biggest stage it had to offer. The night it all came crashing down. Randi gathered everything he had collected, the intercepted recordings and the video of Popoff's so-called miracles, and he carried it on to The Tonight Show, where Johnny Carson presided over the largest late-night audience in the country. This was the moment everything had been building toward. Carson, who had trained as a magician in his younger years, understood instantly the magnitude of what he was about to show America. Randi played it for the world to see. He showed Popoff making his divine pronouncements, and then he played Elizabeth's voice, feeding him those identical words only seconds beforehand. The studio understood in a heartbeat. Randi delivered a line that has outlived nearly everyone involved in the affair. He pointed out that it turned out God's frequency was 39.17 megahertz, and that God was apparently a woman who sounded exactly like Popoff's wife. Carson sat there visibly shaken, calling the recordings disturbing. Overnight, the prophet became a national punchline. Yet Popoff did not crumble the way you might expect a caught man to crumble. He came out fighting. He released a statement insisting that everything Randi had claimed was untrue. He accused the network of hiring an actress to impersonate his wife on a doctored videotape. He wrapped himself in the language of faith and declared this a coordinated attack on Christian leaders everywhere. A spokesperson even tried to argue that the earpiece existed only so he could speak with the television crew, except the tapes contained no such crew chatter, only a wife reading off the names of the sick and the desperate. Within days, the denials disintegrated, and Popoff quietly changed his story. Suddenly, the device was something almost everybody already knew about. Suddenly, his wife only occasionally passed along the name of a person who needed extra prayer. In September of 1987, a little over a year after that broadcast, Popoff's organization filed for bankruptcy. The paperwork listed more than 700 creditors and debts climbing past $1 million. The empire that had pulled in an estimated $4 million a year at its height was officially finished. The reckoning that everyone had been waiting for seemed to have finally arrived. The lights had gone dark. It looked like goodbye forever. Except it was nothing of the sort, because while the world was busy celebrating the downfall of a fraud, Popoff was already quietly studying how to come back, and his second act would dwarf everything that came before it. The resurrection nobody wanted. By his own account, his donations dipped for only a handful of months before they stabilized and began climbing again, and by the close of that very first year, he claimed he was right back where he had started. He rebuilt smarter than before. He adjusted his message and bought airtime on networks reaching fresh audiences who had never laid eyes on the Carson tapes. According to a former employee who eventually found the courage to speak out, the prayer requests pouring in from suffering people were typed into a database and then shredded, never read, never prayed over by anyone. Investigators even traced the so-called miracle water back to ordinary bottled water, the kind anyone could grab off a store shelf for pocket change. And the money came rushing back like a tide. By 2005, the ministry was pulling in more than $23 million in a single year. Popoff paid himself over $600,000, and his wife and children together collected more than $500,000 on top of that. Then he made the slickest move of his entire career. He reorganized the whole operation as a church, which meant he no longer had to tell the government, or anyone at all, how much money was flowing through his hands. The books simply went dark. But why the final sentence took so long? When James Randi looked back on his life's work, there was a quiet sadness whenever Peter Popoff's case came up. Randi believed he had exposed everything. He captured the hidden radio transmissions, uncovered the secret frequency, revealed Elizabeth Popoff feeding information into her husband's earpiece, and showed millions exactly how the so-called miracles were staged. It seemed impossible that anyone could ignore such overwhelming evidence. Yet many did. Some continued following Popoff, while others simply placed their trust in the next person, making similar promises. Randi eventually reached a painful conclusion. People do not always choose the truth when hope is being offered. That is the uncomfortable lesson this story leaves behind. For decades, many expected the dramatic courtroom ending where Popoff would finally answer for everything. But it never happened. He was never criminally convicted for the faith-healing performances that made him famous. Even after his ministry collapsed in the late 1980s, he returned to television and rebuilt his following around new promises and products. Time, however, changes every story. Popoff is now an elderly man, and his ministry has faced years of criticism, regulatory action, lawsuits, and financial penalties. Whether those events represent justice is something each person must decide. Perhaps accountability does not always arrive through one dramatic verdict. Sometimes it comes slowly through public exposure, legal scrutiny, and a reputation that never escapes its past. And somewhere tonight, a packet of miracle spring water may still sit on someone's kitchen table, giving hope to someone who desperately needs it. That may be Peter Popoff's true legacy, not a prison sentence, but a lasting reminder of how easily hope can outweigh evidence. Do you believe Peter Popoff is finally facing the reckoning he spent a lifetime escaping? Or will he slip away one more time? Share your honest thoughts in the comments below.